Let's welcome Haseeb Fasihi.
Assalamu alaikum. How you guys doing today?
Good, 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 good. So right off the bat, Haseeb, we know that these particular times that we're in are very challenging for everyone, regardless of their profession. We know that you, as the performance and player development coach for the Lakeland and Orlando Magic,
Hmm.
with the NBA season being postponed and canceled at this particular moment, how's it been for you making that adjustment? You used to being face to face with players, you used to
Hmm.
being up close and personal with the organization. So how's it been to make that adjustment?
First of all, I'd just like to thank you guys for bringing me on, and it's an honor to be a part of this organization and trying to put this out there. It's funny. Before I even get to that, I was actually sending this flyer out to a lot of Muslims, and now some of them are becoming aware of Mala and Christian sports media because they felt like this should have been done years ago. So knowing that outlet is there, they know that they can have access to it. So this is something great. Um, and to answer your question, first of all, like when the season ended, we were on our way to play the Miami Heat G League team, and when I was in Lakeland, they had a situation where obviously Rudy Gobert, when he got the virus, and then once Adam Silver that night canceled the whole league, it trickled down to the whole nation. The first thing we as an organization thought about as a priority was the players, and that comes down to how do we prepare for them? What should they do when they're not allowed back in the facilities? So we're kind of doing what we're doing right now. Like we're doing Zoom calls. I do one-on-one consultation with guys, making sure they're eating right, making sure they're lifting. The only issue that most players have in this time is that they don't have access to equipment or a gym. So most of the development part is tough, but the weight training part is kind of doable because we can have them buy equipment or we send them stuff and then they just follow a program. Um, but there's been some guys that have been dealing with it mentally in a way that they were on their way back from rehab and then season gets cut off and then now they can't play, so they're like mentally not there. So we had to get some psychiatrists to make sure they follow up with them, make sure they're doing good. But overall, most players have been responsive. Some have been inconsistent. We all know the nature of the deal. Hey, let's be at home with our families, making sure, that's a priority. So some guys are not even thinking about basketball. Some are thinking about basketball. So, mashallah, like in this point of time, our staff in Orlando, we stay in touch pretty often. So we have a cognitive idea of what we should do weekly for the players, and not only for them, but for us in preparing for what might happen if the season does come back. And if it doesn't come back, what's the next plan? So we just been following up with guys, making sure they're on point. And, we have one Muslim on our team, Mo Bamba, and, I'm sure, I know he's fasting and working out at the same time. So knowing that is a good thing because he's also around another Muslim player I know from UCF. His name is Ibrahim Doumbia. You guys will know him soon, and they've been living together. So, it's kind of good to see that type of unity also come about, even during the month of Ramadan, that there are some Muslim players out there that are taking heed on, staying intact with their deen.
Man, that's amazing. That's amazing, man. And you're right there in the middle of it, man, just helping them grow and develop. And, that's pretty much what we want to talk about is just growth and development, not only for you, but, some tips on how players, individuals who are aspiring to play in college, whether they're aspiring to play in the NBA overseas. We
Mm-hmm.
just really want to really kind of give them a roadmap of what your experience is, your insight,
Mm-hmm.
as a player development coach. But before we get into that, let's get into you and how you came about. And let's start out, with your childhood. So tell us where you're from, where you grew up at, and kind of
Mm-hmm.
how your upbringing was.
Well, I was actually born in Pakistan, and I think about like 2 months after I was born, my dad wasn't there for when I was born. My dad was in Miami at the time, so my mother, when she had me, we had left Pakistan like 2 months after my birth and flew to America, and then met up with my dad in Miami, and that's where I was raised my whole life. I lived a regular childhood. I was just around, the wrong group of kids, and there were times that my parents would just have me, go to the basketball court in the neighborhood and just be active with, the other kids that's around the block. But I don't really think basketball would be something for me because, my parents they're not into sports. My dad, he's not a basketball guy. He doesn't watch it. He don't know what's going on. But like for me, it's always been about, what can I do to get better as myself as a person when I was young. So I worked on a lot of, artistic stuff. I used to write. I was a writer. I used to draw a lot. I used to, do a lot of things that was more creative based in my childhood. It was a point that when I was growing up, there was not a respect level for me, amongst my peers. So basketball kind of, took its shape in a way that, hey, it's a cool thing to do. I was doing it because it was cool around the block. I wasn't told to play basketball, so I was just being active. But Lord behold, man, like, some kids would just, make fun of me that I wasn't a good player. Then I was like, wait, I take that to offense. I noticed there was a competitive side to me that it kind of, unleashed that narrative. So then I started just working hard, getting better, got into middle school. I made my middle school team, and then I was like, okay, this thing is doable. So then from then on, it's just been an uphill battle with competition and people doubting me, especially when you're from Pakistan. There's a lot of limitations with your skill set. So most of my development came from self-affirmation of, personal development, mentally, physically, and spiritually. So I would always work on my body. I was always work on injury prevention. When I was when I got to college, I had an opportunity to go overseas. And, when I took the opportunity, it was actually in London. They had loved every part of my game because I wasn't a scorer. So they liked that I liked getting the guys involved because I was more about feeling the energy of the team. And that's one thing I try to emphasize with a lot of players nowadays is that you should feel the energy of your teammates more than what you bring out, because then you can feel the flow of the game and figure out who's not locked in and who is. So then you can find which ones need that extra push. So using that, I felt like, as I've discussed previously in my past, that I used to get hurt a lot when I was playing overseas, and then I had to educate myself on how can I, improve myself from not getting hurt again, or being preventative exercises. So I wasn't no doctor, I wasn't a specialist. I just did research on my own. And then from then, when I was in London, from that point, I realized like, hey, this part of, development of injury prevention and being durable, flexible, and strength and conditioning, it kind of caught an eye to me. So once I was able to apply that skill set to me, I was like, hey, let me teach it to my teammates. And then it worked out well. So then after that, I came back to America and finished my AA degree at UCF. And that's where me and you met during that time. And when I came back to America, I was figuring out like, hey, you know what, this is something that I can really do in this profession. And I had no idea that I would ever be in the NBA, because I really was thinking more into like biomedical engineering or like some type of mechanical engineering that involved physics, that involved biomechanics and function of the body, and do some type of rehab work. But God works in different ways, man. There was a time in 2011, the NBA had a lockout. And during that lockout, I had to select a class in August. And my supervisor was like, hey, you should select the strength and conditioning class. So I was like, all right, I'll pick that class. So when I picked it, my professor ended up being one of the head strength coaches, if not the head strength coach for the New York Knicks at the time. So he didn't have a job because the NBA was in the lockout. So he was going to be a professor out of college. So he chose UCF, and he was only going to be there for one semester. And the way God set it up, man, it was like in the nick of time, and it was the right moment, the right time. And I picked the class. First day of our syllabus session, he was like, hey, I'm the head strength coach for the New York Knicks. I was like, what? No way. Okay, you know what? I got to connect with this dude. Now, I wasn't asking for no opportunity. I was
Right.
just like, hey, let me get on his mindset, see what he knows, you know. And I was
Mm.
still a hooper back then. You know, me and you, we played in that league, so I was just like still locked
Right.
in at hooper. So I just wanted to educate myself. So he saw that drive in me, and we stayed in touch from 2011 even till now, until like 2017. And my growth since then, from going from there to IMG Academy, developing players there. You know,
Mm-hmm.
ESPN put an article out with me. So when ESPN put that article out and I was featured in it, I sent it to him. And then a couple months later, he calls me and he was like, hey, we got an opening for the Orlando Magic. We want you to be a part of it. And that was back in 2000. From 2011 all the way to 2017 was that time frame where I was finding myself and trying to groom and develop and chisel my skill set. And Lord and behold, I never rushed it. I just knew the
Mm-hmm.
time was right. And then I got in, you know.
Wow, man, that's amazing, man. That's amazing. So let's go back just a second, because I have a lot of Pakistani friends, and most of them are really kind of channeled in a certain direction career wise,
Yeah.
whether it's medicine, whether it's a lawyer, finance, the more traditional route. So what was it like, talking to your parents about sports? Like you said, your father wasn't into sports. He wasn't a basketball fan. So what was it like, as you were going through this particular journey, you're having these challenges, you're getting teased a little bit, what was it like, going back home, explaining to your parents, like this is what I really want to do?
That's a good question, because they didn't, I had to tell them that I was more involved with sports medicine than it was the actual sport itself, because that was the only way I could sell it, because I see the foreseeable future. They don't, because nobody has done it,
Right.
So for me, the toughest part was, showing that I was making income. That's the
Hmm.
biggest part, like through the process, was like, hey, am I doing this and able to support myself? I lived in 7 different cities outside of my hometown. So I know, like, wherever I go, I have to build my independence on, whether it's my finances, whether it's, establishing myself with a house, and taking care of myself. I had to make sure I was taken care of, and my family. So no matter what opportunity, whether it was working at IMG or even starting my own business, I had to make sure I had some type of influx of money to show that, hey, there is progress along the way. Now, it took a while for them to buy in, because it was tough, because the reason why I stopped playing was to come back and finish school.
Mm-hmm.
You get me? And that's something my dad wanted me to do. So the whole part of me, because I was kind of stubborn at the time, I didn't want to go back to school. I was like, hey, I'm gonna play overseas. I'm gonna be great. I'll make this money here. And then, God humbled me quick. And then he was like, hey, if injuries happen, then what? And then that's something that I had to teach myself, was like, hey, this is a long process of, of that I have to think about, like, hey, is education more important than me playing right now? And I thought about it at that time that, hey, I need to do that. So when I came back and I showed them, like, hey, look, I gave up basketball to go to school and finish my degree, but I'm doing a degree that's in relation to sports. Then it's like, okay, you know what? Let's see what happens. So it kind of eased their mind a little bit. But for the most part, after I graduated to 2017, I was unemployed. I worked for IMG, but then I had left IMG to come back to Miami to help my family out. And then that's when I started my own business. It's called Made Performance. And I really focused on, developing not just youth athletes, but at the professional level. Because at IMG, I have built some relationships with a lot of NBA players like Iman Shumpert, Vanderbilt, Ron Artest, like guys like that. And from then on, Robert Covington, from then on, I was like, hey, you know what? Let me move to Miami. It's a very beautiful place that people like to visit in the off season. So I feel like there was some potential there. So when I moved to Miami, then players started coming my way, and then I had to show my parents, like, hey, look, I'm working with elite athletes now. They're paying me good money. This is something I want to stick with. The NBA was not anything I had put in their mind, because you can't put something that I didn't feel like was realistic at the moment.
Right.
I had to be more realistic of what is in the moment. So, and then, prayers, and man, through my mom and dad prayers, bro, I'm in the situation where I'm at now.
Man, wonderful, wonderful. So it seems like to me, man, across your journey, you had to validate a lot of, at different milestones. You had to validate yourself, whether it was with people in the neighborhood, whether it was your parents. So with sports, you really can't take sports as far as you've taken it without having a love for it. So what brought the love of the sport of basketball to you? Was it players in the NBA that you aspired to be? Was there any individual or group of players in the NBA that inspires you? So what
Yeah,
inspired? Yeah.
great question, because there was a point in time where I felt like basketball was done for me. Like after I graduated, I think when I started my business, I felt like around like 2015, 2016, that year, I was like, at my worst, and I was, not making a lot of money, and I figured out like, hey man, this is probably not it for me. I need to go back to school, do something else. But the one thing that always helped me was that it's crazy, because anytime Ramadan came around, I had like a wake up call. So I was always reminded by certain people in my circle that, hey, why you even thinking about that? You should keep pushing, and there's always a light at the end of the tunnel, like the basic saying. And at that point, I was always thinking like, hey, I was walking into a tunnel that had a dead end, and I was going to stay in there. I never thought of it as like, hey, there's also light at the end of it. Let me just keep pushing. So most of my love of the game came from not just personal passion, but like other people reflecting their energy on me, like, hey, you can hoop, people listen to you, keep doing what you're doing. And I just stuck with it, and that's one thing I learned, was that, whenever you start something, never give up on it. And then there was a gut feeling I had, man, that there were people in my network that were going to help me. And I didn't know how long it was going to take, but I knew good enough people. And when I established my relationship with that strength coach from the Knicks, he had got the job with the Magic when I started my own business. So when he had left New York and became the head guy in Orlando, I thought it was great. I stayed in touch with him, and he kind of reminded me how the game was evolving as well. And during that time, he had the Victor Oladipos, Dwight Howard, that era of Orlando Magic basketball. And I was really tapping into like, hey, how should professionals prepare better? So my passion not just came from playing, but also came from the circle that I had. And they kind of influenced me to be better than what I thought I was going to be. So I wouldn't be in this position without the confidence being given by my inner circle.
Wonderful, man. I know from my experience, sports is a relationship business. So talk to us about the importance of mentors along the way, the relationships that you were able to build, especially at an institution. And I call it an institution, IMG, because IMG is, they're known for developing athletes, whether it's tennis, whether it's basketball. That's an institution and an academy that's developed, some of the biggest names out there. So talk to us about, your relationships, your mentors along the way, the ones that you mentioned that inspired you.
Yeah. So my first mentor, I'll say, he's a strength coach. When I first got into the league, his name is Bill Burgos. When I first got into the league, like I said, he was with New York. When I got into the league, he was with the Magic, and he put me on. And then after my first year with Orlando, he left Orlando and went to the Timberwolves. So now he's the head strength coach for the Timberwolves. So Bill Burgos has been my main number one mentor from the start. I had a mentor at IMG. His name was Dan Bartow. He trained he was the head of player development at the time. And he was the one that trusted my player development skills, because when I hoop against the NBA guys, he's seen that I was getting buckets. So I was like, okay, he was like, okay, this kid can hoop, and NBA players kind of respected me. And it was hard for them to respect me at first, because when they look at me, they're like, yo, who's this 6-foot brown guy? How is he going to tell me how to play? You get me? Like, I'm already in the league. What can I do better? So there were times that I had some trust issues. I had to find my confidence in speaking into God. But my mentors always told me, like, treat it like the way you're playing the game. Like, if you don't have the confidence in yourself, how is anybody going to pick you to play? So the same way in this business is that if you don't have confidence in yourself, how is a player going to like you and pick you to work with them? So one of those key things was the stuff that stuck in my head, and I still stick with it. Mashallah, one of my main clients right now, Jay Crowder, I work with him every day. I just got done working with him today. I've been working with him for about 4 years independently before I even got on the Magic. So, one of my mentors, Phil Handy, who's the assistant coach of the Lakers right now, he was with Cleveland when I first met him. And, he's been like schooling me along the way with the stuff that's going on, the advancement of player development. So guys like that have attributed to my growth, but I've also realized that you can never be the one to ask for a job up front when you don't know the person personally. So when it came to building a relationship, I always thought about like, oh, I don't want to be that dude that's like, hey, let me get an opportunity. You got an internship, but I don't even know the guy's life. You know,
Right.
like Hanif, if I wanted to ever work with you, I want to know about your history. I want to know about your childhood. You know, with these mentors, I always wanted to know their story. Because once
Right.
this younger generation has to realize that, you know, to get the job you want, you have to be around people that have the job you want and the job that you need. So once you're around them, you can never ask questions or have an influx of conversations that are repetitive to what you want, you know, because it's not always about what, you know, what we want. It's always about what the story is in the actual storyline of the actual mentor you have. So most of my mentors, I've always tried to figure out, hey, what did it take to get there where you're at? What skill sets did you attribute along the way? So it was more about me asking more about how can I get better. And that's what my relationship with the coaches and my mentors got better and better along the way, because they knew like, oh, this kid, he's not out here asking for anything. You know, I'm not going to be the one pickpocketing them or just forcing the situation, like, hey, bothering them all the time about internships. So that's kind of like what bred to me where I'm at today in my situation with a lot of these great mentors, is that, hey, I had to know about them first before anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times, man, people put the cart before the horse. You know, they want the job, they want the opportunity without, you know, taking the necessary steps of really building that relationship. So we're gonna take, you know, just a small path to your profession now. You know, a lot of people don't know what, you know, the G League is. You know, they're used to hearing about what the D League. So tell everybody, just, you know, if you can, real quick, you know, what's the difference between the D League and the G League? You know, you and I, we know what it is.
Yeah.
But you know, tell everybody what the G League is.
Yeah. So back in 2017, when I got the job with Orlando, before 2017, every year before 2016, I should say, the NBA minor league was called the Development League. So that's why it was initiated as the D League. So there came a point that they wanted to make a new initiative and fund it more. The NBA thought about a better program, and I give props to David Stern because this was all his idea. Rest in peace to him. That they wanted to get a big corporation involved, and the biggest corporation that got involved was Gatorade. So Gatorade thought about it as like, hey, let's go into a minor league system. Let's figure out what type of products that we can send to players and test, and then see where we can go from there. So the Gatorade pretty much bought the D League, or funded it, I should say. I don't know the logistics behind the whole contract and stuff, but the D League went from the G League. The reason why the G is in the G League is because it's the Gatorade League, but it's the most premier minor league system in the world. Players of all types are in there, NBA and overseas players that get drafted in the G League draft. So every team in the league, except the Trailblazers and the Denver Nuggets, they don't have their own minor league team yet. They haven't funded it yet. They're figuring that out, and it's going to happen soon. The Pelicans just had their first one this year. So pretty much 28 teams in the league have a minor league system where it's more of it's a laboratory of development. And what I mean by that is that, you know, if there's a player that's on the NBA team that's not playing many minutes, but they want to develop him, they'll send him down to the G League and then monitor his progress by him playing more minutes. So if I played for Orlando and I'm only getting 2 minutes a game, I'm not really going to develop into an efficient player if the NBA for some reason gave me 30 minutes. So my biggest, like, the NBA is now thinking of it, okay, you know what, let's assign certain players to the G League, have them develop there, play 30 plus minutes, have a same system that the NBA does as far as preparation, practice, even the system, play calls, all that is the same. The only thing that gets kind of imbalances, one of the things that have the imbalances is the actual funding. Is like, you know, the G League has a certain budget. They don't have the NBA budget. So the G League, we don't have a private jet. So we fly commercial. And that's why due to this coronavirus, the G League was completely canceled because of the risk of players going on commercial flights. So that kind of is the system where, players are sent down, even players are drafted to even build the culture of minor league basketball. And they always put it in small cities around the country because some of those small cities don't have, a professional sports team, kind of like how baseball does and following the same motto. And we just have good amount of ticket sales. Like, Orlando's G League team is in Lakeland. So when you're in Lakeland, you get a lot of traffic from not just the Lakeland community, but you get it from Tampa, from those people that can't go to an Orlando Magic game. They just drive 20 minutes to Lakeland and watch a player that got sent down from Orlando and watch him hoop. Or even if, there was a time Kendrick Perkins was playing and they're like, hey, Kendrick Perkins is with the Cavs G League team trying to come back. Oh, he's playing in Lakeland. Let's go watch that. So, like, there'll be certain players that get featured every game, but then you have there's a lot of elite talent in the G League, even from the Division II level, that get lost and found. And, they're put on the map in the G League and they get called up. So, if you're great at the game of basketball, just like we noticed in the Last Dance documentary about Scottie Pippen and how he got found out of an NAIA school, the same thing can happen in the G League. We find so many players that I was just like, wow, like this kid did not go to Division I. How do we miss this? But, if you're talented, you get found. And the G League is where it's pretty much, like I said, a laboratory of development, not only for the NBA pros, but for the pros that are either overseas or just got out of college and are trying to groom to the next level. And that's how they can get their call up.
So you're in a very unique situation where you're with an NBA team and you're with the NBA's affiliate team, and you have a responsibility of developing the minor league talent and ensure that they get to the NBA level. What's one of the biggest challenges that you face with working with the minor league team and the NBA? Because you and I both know that there's certain players that have an aspiration of getting to the NBA, but then there's also players that the organization wants to concentrate on developing as well.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. Like this year, Melvin Frazier, who was our second round pick last year, he was sent down. He was sent down both last year and this year. And no, even my first year, I forgot when he got drafted, but he always been sent down. He doesn't play much in Orlando. The issue with him in Orlando was that his work ethic was kind of weak. So we had to find a way for him to build that work ethic and show like, hey, he's worthy of a second contract in Orlando. So sometimes what I deal with is, you got a player from the NBA that gets sent down that's making $2 million a year, and then I got a player that's making $40,000 a year. Tax bracket's a little different. One is working hard. One is working hard to get what he wants. Like, hey, I want that 10-day. I want that NBA contract, or I want that two-way contract. And then you got the $2 million guy who's kind of comfortable coming down to the G League, and he's just like, oh, I'm just here to play my game and then get called back up. And then, I've had issues where, I'll try to emphasize my my development program, whether it's weight training or, skill development. And the players would be like, okay, how's this going to benefit me? And then I would have to educate them like, hey, this is what you're doing in Orlando. We're doing the same, because sometimes you got to remind them. They're not really thinking about, what the staff does and what the staff is capable of doing. I'm not seeing these players all the time from Orlando. So when they get sent down, I have to remind them like, hey, this is kind of the system we have. This is the culture we're bringing in. And then even when I'm working for Orlando during their home games, I have moments where I have a relationship with a lot of the guys that are veterans there, like DJ Augustine, Aaron Gordon, Vucevic. Like those guys, I'm so cool with, because I've been there with them from the jump, since I got into the league. So they know, like, and even Terrence Ross, like, we all have a good relationship. So when I'm with them and I tell them to do something, they do it. There's no hesitation. But it's always the rookies that come in and trying to feel for everybody's energy. Usually I notice the veterans, when they're a part of an NBA organization, they got to be on point with everybody, because word gets up to the top. The rookies don't really know about that yet. They know about it when something happens, like if they miss they come late to a practice, or they miss a treatment session, or they're walking in late in the weight room, and upper management finds out. So like there's little details like that I have to deal with. But at the end of the day, in the minor league system, I love it because I'm in control of what I can implement, and then I'm also in control of what information gets brought down and what I can use.
Yeah, man, that's tough, man, because one of the things that's very important when you're working on in player development is trust.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how are you able to gain the trust of both type of athletes? The ones in the NBA, and then also the ones who are trying to get to that NBA level. So,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the recommendations that you would transfer to other player development people, or just in life? How
Mm-hmm.
are you able to build the trust of a professional athlete getting paid millions of dollars? But I
Mm-hmm.
know it's easy. I mean, not easy. But then you're also talking about gaining the trust of somebody that really has their career kind of in
Mm-hmm.
balance.
I think the biggest thing about that is your knowledge, man. Like if you don't have the knowledge to educate the athlete, they'll never listen. And when knowledge breeds power, you want to be able to know enough that any question that they answer, they ask any question that they ask you, you have an answer for it. So my biggest thing has always been like, if I'm working on a glute exercise and they're doing some type of deadlift or they're doing some type of RDL or even a glute bridge, players will always ask, "Oh, why should I do this exercise? I don't feel anything." And then you have to educate them, like, and then once you're able to educate them, then they foresee my thought process. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna stick to this. And then the other part, first thing is your knowledge, is you first convincing the player why he should trust you and elaborating on why these exercises or why these drills are in correlation for his betterment, and not only for his betterment and how it translates to the game. And then the second part of the trust level comes from the upper staff, which is a general manager, assistant GM, coaching staff. They have to sometimes. I've had issues where some players. I want to say it's an issue, more of a situation. I would have situations that our GM would have to tell the players like, "Hey, you should work with Haseeb. He's worked with so many NBA players that are making way more money than you, and they pay him in the off season. So if I were you, I would listen to him." And then they'll be like, "Okay, all right, cool." And then sometimes, we're such a social media driven era that when some of the players find me on social media and they see what I've done in the past and they ask about it, then the trust level starts building up. They're like, "Oh, you've worked with Miles Bridges, you worked with, Rondé Hollis Jefferson, like, oh, you worked with Jay Crowder, like there's so many players you worked with. Okay, I can trust you now. I see why you're in the league. You're not just a kid that just graduated college and came into the league. The league would only hire people that are professional enough to work with the professional athlete." So if there's any people out there that don't feel like, because everybody can say that, "Hey, I want to work in the NBA," like everybody wants to. It's not I get people that hit me up all the time. And the biggest thing here is elaborating that, hey, if you're going to be involved in this field, you have to make sure that your confidence level and your knowledge is on cue, because once the player loses your trust, it's over. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the biggest, like, mashallah, I've been able to have a consistent flow of respect from the players and that trust level. But at the end of the day, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to be on your way out soon. And mashallah, I just finished my third year, so I'm just staying with it.
Man, wonderful. So knowledge is the key of building trust. So let me ask you this: you're an entrepreneur. You have your own training program. You have your called Made Performance. How do you balance that with also working with an NBA franchise?
So first of all, I can't work with my company when I'm in the season. So I signed 1-year deals with the NBA. So every year I'm not signing a 3-year commitment or 5-year commitment. My general manager actually gave me the green light that, hey, well, you're gonna have to work for a year for one contract, and then in the summer you can go on and do what you need to do privately. Because I have some clientele in the off season that are in the NBA, but it also is a conflict of interest to the team. So I don't want that issue to ever come about, or even the NCAA finding out that while I'm under an NBA contract, that something happens with me working with an NCAA player trying to get to the NBA and there's a whole tampering issue. I don't want to be involved in none of that. So, mashallah, I've had some flexibility where every summer since I've been in the league, I can work with my company. Now, I do have people on my team down here in Miami that handle the clientele base while I'm away. And I don't have my name on it or nothing. It's just all through the team aspect and how we function as an organization. And they handle all the work. And then while I'm away, I foresee things, but I'm never involved in it. But for the most part, when my time comes, like, this season just ended, now I can get into the mix of things of getting back to my summer grind, but still have a relationship with Orlando during the process of me waiting until the next season, or even when the NBA training camp starts. So the biggest thing is always organizing the demand that we have for the clientele down here. And I get that handled with the team that I have, and I'm blessed to have them. But then it's also about, like, hey, when my turn comes and I need to come back to my grind in South Florida, or even no matter where it is, and work with players, that's where the biggest thing comes in, is like, hey, this is your process to now get back into the groove of things in the summer before you go back to the NBA team.
Wonderful, wonderful. So those of you who are tuned in, we're here with Haseeb Fasihi. If you have questions, we're going to begin our question and answer period with the audience here in the next few moments. So if you have questions, go ahead and post them, and the host will actually facilitate those questions to us, and then we'll be able to get a couple of questions in. So another question I wanted to ask is, now that you are where you are, the game has changed a great deal. From data analytics to AAU ball. So how do you stay on top of all of the information? How do you stay, up to date with all the new training regimens? With, one particularly is load management. That's a huge thing right now, especially with player development. So how do you navigate, staying on top of your game, being able to disseminate that information, and then also getting the buy-in? Because a lot of old heads, they don't really buy into data analytics.
Analytics, yeah, I agree. And I think to that question, the biggest thing here is that now we're dealing with a generation that plays so much AAU ball that even at a young age, there's always kids that play like 5 games a day, or even 10, like 5 or 6 games a weekend. And they do that over a stretch of 6 to 8 months in the AAU season. So over time, when you add that load on that body for that kid, it catches up to him. So when players get to the league and then they deal with, the weightlifting, the traveling, the treatment, playing 33 minutes, that load management of them being, why is there so many injuries in the league now, is because these kids are stressed to train and play so much at a young age. It ain't just high school ball no more. When I was growing up, AAU ball wasn't that big. Like, it was just a luxury to have because you were able to pay and travel. But now is where the AAU circus is where it's at. High school ball is not even considered valid anymore. So most of these kids are looking into, pretty much the players are being drafted now. Most of them have the AAU lifestyle that they grew up on and playing so many games on a weekend. And then when they get to the league, they're getting a little tidbit of injuries that's holding them back, because all that load all that load on their body and their joints is catching up to them. Because, the body is just like a car, the mileage is always being adding on. So if you're not tuning it along the way, it's going to fall apart eventually, slowly but surely. So some players are dealing with nagging injuries, whether it's ankle or tendinopathy issues. Like, there's always something that comes along for the player that when they were playing AAU ball and then they transition into college, and then they have that high stress and load, and then they transition to the NBA, and then there's another high stress and load, and then by the time they're 24, 25, they're getting these injuries, and you're just like, wow, I'm healthy, I look fit. But it's just, at the younger level, there should be a way that we should manage a lot of the load for these younger kids. Like, I would never suggest a kid playing 3 to 5 games on a weekend. 1 game a day is fine. But, we live in a world that, the AAU circuits, they're making money. They want to have some type of corporations involved, like Nike and Adidas. So, which is great, which helps them with the sponsorships. But it's also, you're using the kids, but they're not seeing the foreseeable future about, like, okay, you know what? Why are teams playing 3 games a day? 3 to 5 games a day. So that's like the biggest thing that I see as far as that load management. And then when it comes to analytics, every NBA team I'm sure of, I haven't been on all of them, but I know for us exactly, every NBA team has analytic-driven people that they hire, software engineers or even coding people. So they have, cameras set up around practices, and they have these data-driven chips that we put in our shorts, and with those chips, we analyze how much force production is being used on the court. Are certain players using their left leg more than their right? Are they generating enough power on both legs? Like, there's always like some type of force attribution that's being tested. And then the other analytic part is the stats analytics that we all understand. Like, oh, the mid-range game, don't use the mid-range game because analytics show that that's a bad shot. Well, we don't take enough of good mid-range shots to show this a high percentage shot, but we're sticking to the 3-ball because, that's kind of like where the game is at now. So, we can look at the 90s and the early 2000s. The mid-range game was so dominant, but it changed because a lot of the guys don't have that skill set, and they're so 3-point shot driven that that's a norm. So most of the analytics that we deal with is conflicting with the old heads, because the old heads are like, nah, we got to develop every aspect of the game, not just the 3-ball. But, nowadays it's like, nah, don't shoot the mid-range shot, shoot the 3-ball. That's what's better for the team. So there's always a conflict there. Great players find a way to balance both, but then there's always a way that, you can find a happy medium to, work it out.
Yeah, so balance is important with the data analytics, and then also, you just having a feel for the game.
Mm-hmm.
So the first question we want to take from the audience is, someone asks, are you familiar with Tim Grover and then his impact on Michael Jordan's career? Everybody's watching The Last Dance right now, so they're looking at, Tim Grover and his impact on Michael Jordan's career. So are you familiar with Tim Grover? And how he impacted Michael Jordan's career?
Yeah, I'm very well of Tim Grover. He was actually the one person that gave me, like, I don't know him personally, but I know like Tim Grover is the one guy I looked up to that was at a grand scale and was like, okay, you know what? Whatever I'm studying, he's studying, and he's doing what I want to do now. I got to know what he knows. Whether I meet him in the future or not, I just know I'm around people that think like him and do stuff like him. But Tim Grover was the first one to emphasize that, hey, working with Jordan and managing, his body and even that load back then, you could see how he became a champion, because he was being beat up by the Pistons so bad, he had to put on weight to be able to manage the beating. So even with that concept, you want to look at players nowadays that, hey, yeah, the league is a little bit softer because of the rules to make it more entertaining. But at the end of the day, there's still contact involved in the sport. So if some guys are not strong enough and they deal with the contact, then something happens where they can get hurt. So Tim Grover, I love his philosophy because he's pretty much a doctor of the game, because not only does he does strength and conditioning, but he also gets on the court and does on-court stuff with guys, understanding movement patterns. But, Tim Grover is somebody that I really looked up to as a kid, not as a mentor, but as a role model, because I was like, hey, you know what, if I'm in this field, who's the best at it and how they're doing it? So, and for what he did with Michael Jordan, D Wade, Kobe, even, Gilbert Arenas and KD, I always thought about like, hey, you know what, that's somebody I should follow his footsteps. And I'm actually still reading his book called Relentless. If there's anybody out there that wants to know a lot more about Tim Grover, read that book, because I'm still going through it.
Excellent, excellent. So the next question that we have is, what kind of skills have helped you navigate challenges in a player's psychological motivation? I know that's a big one.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it comes down to the psyche of it comes from, are you going to spend time off the court with the player in the film room? And that's one thing I had to do a lot more of this year, was actually sitting down with the players and watching film and understanding their thought process of how the game works. And then you get to know the person, you get to know the player personally, when not only when you're breaking down film, but their reaction of counters, and when I ask them a question and how they respond. So little things like that has always been the key. Was, are they there mentally when I ask them a question? Are they giving short-term, short answers, or are they giving long, detailed answers? So when I know they're giving me long, detailed answers, they're interested in the conversation. They're interested to get to know more about, well, not just what I know, but what we're discussing about. But if it's a short answer, and I'm just like, okay, this guy might not have interest, he might be tired, I'll give him a break, but I'm not gonna force it into too much. So sometimes it comes into your instincts have to come into play, and that is a hard thing to explain, because I've I have a niche over the years that I can understand a player's vibe. Now, everybody connects with people in a different way because of the way they're brought up or the communication skills. So I think the biggest thing would be first evolve your communication skills and not just talking to a player as a coach, but talking to the player as, you know, a friend to them, and then they'll be more open to you with their mindset of what they want to tell you and how you guys should grow together.
Okay. The next question is, let me see here. Do you think community work correlates positively with a player's performance and psychological benefits for a player volunteering within the community? So they're asking about players, the balance between doing work in the community, you know, doing philanthropic work, using their platform for community, and how does that correlate positively in the player's performance? And then does it have psychological benefits when a player is volunteering within the community? How does that overlap?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we kind of have to do community service. Not only players do the community service, but coaches as well. So I'm always on site helping, you know, an organization build a home for a family, or we're out giving out food during Thanksgiving, or there's always something, doing a little small basketball camp for kids and having the players interact. I think the biggest thing is more important for their psyche than it is, you know, on the court, because the psyche part of it comes to where you're looking at a player that is interacting with a kid. The kid is looking up to the player so much. Sometimes the kid reminds the player, like, okay, you know what? I got kids watching me. I got to do great. You know, I got kids that are big fans of me. I got to do great. So, like, let's say you're the athlete, Hanif, and me, and I'm the coach, and we go to a community service event. And if we're in that community service event, a lot of kids are coming to you, asking you questions, you signing autographs, you're doing your community service work, and then you're playing a game the next day. So most of those kids come to the game the next day, right? And then when you're warming up, you know, some of those kids see you and you notice the kids and you're like, oh, those kids are here. And they're like, hey, Hanif, what's up, Hanif? Remember us from yesterday? And then that kind of puts you into that mental, like, wow, these kids came here to watch me play. And then when you have a good game or even a bad game, you're also thinking about, like, hey, I got these kids watching, you know? So it also looks at, some guys need to be reminded through community service work that it's not only good for the team that they're doing the community service work, but it's also good for the psyche that they have to realize, like, hey, you know what? You know, there's a lot of people that look up to me, whether I see it or not. But, you know, I might not be a popular player, but there's still kids out there watching me because of the team name on my chest. You get me? So a lot of that is in relation to, you know, what type of events are being held. And the best part of the player's development mentally comes from that personal interaction with the actual, you know, with the kids and regular people.
So one question here is, how do you balance, you know, the principles of your faith, and does that carry over to your work with your business and working with the NBA franchise?
I love that question. To be honest, faith has always kept me in check with everything that I'm doing, and it has always reminded me that I wouldn't be here without, you know, our faith. The toughest thing about being in an organization, you deal with people with many faiths. So whether they're Jewish, whether they're Hindu, whether they're Christian or Catholic, you deal with all type of people, you deal with all type of players. So you never want to put an image out there that your religion is dominant in that circle. That's one thing I learned, was like, I can never go out and blatantly say that, hey, I'm Muslim or I'm Islamic, you know, that some people feel some type of way already with the stigma that Islam has, that, oh, you know what, I'm not gonna talk to Haseeb more because I'm Christian and he's Muslim. I don't believe in what he believes in. But that person is not educated. You know what I mean? So a lot of the faith that we have, I think, also evolves around, are we willing enough to open up to a player or a staff member that wants to know more about the religion? You know what I mean? And if it ever gets to that point, it can be a great conversation. And I have had a few conversations with players in the league that when they found out that I was Muslim, they wanted to know more and why I was Muslim and what brought us about. And it's crazy because, you know, we live in a Christianity-driven country. A lot of the Christians don't even know that we have Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, as one of our prophets. So when they hear that part, they get stunned. You know what I mean? Like, oh, wow, y'all believe in Jesus? Like, yeah, he's one of our prophets. So, you know, that's when they hear that part, then they want to know more. And then they see the similarities of, you know, of the religion. And that kind of like puts that notion to the side, like, hey, let's not think outside the box. Let's think with an open mind when there is no box, and see what similarities we have, because, you know, we have to love thy neighbor. So most of these guys are my neighbors, and even the people I work with, you know, you got to show love regardless. So, you know, I think the biggest thing when it comes to faith is showing being the right example for whatever faith you have, and never be too overly forcing into the religion. You know, when somebody asks me, I'll probably say that I'm Muslim, but I'll never force the conversation because, you know, in the world we live in, everybody, you know, thinks a different way. So I try to stay away from, you know, forcing that. But, you know, I pray often. I try to go to Jummah as much as I can. I travel so much. I have my prayers here and there. But for me personally, I know I'm there spiritually, but it comes down to when a player or a staff member, you know, ever brings up a conversation, I never want to say that Islam is better than their religion, because then it causes a conflict. I'll never say that. I mean, it's always about like, hey, what can we do to better ourselves as human beings? And let's put religion to the side and talk as human beings before religion was even brought up, you know? So that's kind of like the biggest part of it.
Excellent. And so that segues into our last question before we go ahead and wrap up. I'm going to sneak this one in real quick. What advice do you have for American Muslim kids interested in playing in the NBA and the WNBA, and how would they find mentors early in their career? Before you answer that, I want to let everybody know from what I know, I think Haseeb is the first Pakistani American Muslim in his position as far as the history of the NBA. So I want to throw that in there just so you know we know that. But the question is, you know, if you have a young person that's interested in making it to the NBA or the WNBA, what advice would you give them? And then how would you suggest they find mentors earlier in their career?
I would first find the type of identity you want to play with. You know, like some players want to be a three-point shooter, some players want to do everything. I think first things first is the NBA looks for players with identities. Like if I'm in the draft and I'm looking for a player, I don't want a player that's just a superstar athlete that has potential, you know, like your James Harden or Paul George or Russell Westbrook. I want to draft a player that can fit the need of my team. So if the team last year was the worst in the league when it comes to three-point shooting, they have the first round pick. There's a three-point shooter available. They're going to probably draft that three-point shooter. That was the best in college. So, you know, it's not always about develop every skill set, but also have an identity that people know you about. So, you know, to all the women and men players that are out there trying to seek the professional level, try to find an identity of your skill set that people want to be aware of. So, you know, if I'm a point guard, I can't just be a rebounding point guard and be a post player at the same time. I got to learn that, you know, I got to be a good passer and a shooter off a pick and roll situation. And then that can be my identity that a team can use to my benefit, you know, and not only for my benefit, for the team's benefit. So teams in the league are always looking for skill identity driven players. College, you're looking at overall skill set. Hey, the kid's capable of playing any different position. Let's put him in there. Let's run the offense. And it's more constricted. I wouldn't say the NBA is just constricted, but to be in the professional level, they like to look at identities. And when it comes to mentors, you know, it's not just about seeking a mentor, it's also reading about them. I think the biggest thing is like people always out here that are seeking mentors day in, day out. Like, hey, I want to have a guy like Hanif as a mentor. I want to have a guy like, you know, Frank Vogel or a Doc Rivers as a mentor. But, you know, you can't come across people like that. So the best that you can do is read on biographies and read about, you know, personal development that can that the book can mentor you during the process until you meet that one mentor you come across. So then you kind of prepare for that situation. You don't want to be an empty mind when you come across somebody elite in the situation, or even an elite mentor. You don't want to have an empty mind. So fill it up with as much knowledge as possible, as much questions you might have about the game, so it shows a little bit of your passion as you're going into it when you do come across a mentor. Because it took me a while to get myself a mentor. So once I finally had one, I had so much information, I knew what to ask, when, where, and why, and how to ask it. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that if you have a mentor early, I know some players that have NBA players at a young age as mentors, and that's a blessing, because then all they're doing is passing on the knowledge of what to do and what not to do. I didn't have that. So I think the biggest thing is that if you don't have it, read about them. Find a mentor that you would wish to have as a mentor. If they have a book, read their biography. If there's not a book about them, read about something that's in relation to how they got to where they're at, or read even about something that's in regards to personal development and motivation. And the book can be your own mentor. You don't need a person.
Excellent, excellent. And right on cue with the topic about growth and development. Excellent advice, man. We really appreciate you being a part of our interview series. We appreciate you stopping by. We know, you just broke fast right before this. I know you got to get to your prayers. We're getting ready to break. It's time to break fast here where we're at. So we appreciate that. Let's give it up for Haseeb. You can follow him on Instagram at Zbo, ZBO 305 on Instagram. And you can follow us, Crescent Sports Media, and at Mala National. We have an interview right back here tomorrow at 6 p.m. Central Time with Super Bowl champion Ryan Khalil Harris. With that being said, Assalamu alaikum wa Ramadan Mubarak. We thank you, appreciate you, and be safe, and talk to you all soon.
Thank you, guys. It was an honor. Appreciate it.